I'm the best at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice. Welcome to a Fifth of Jack Gaming, where today we're going to end up going back to our... And he has an oldie but a goodie, and we can pay 1 green and 1 regenerate Wolverine. Regeneration is an old mechanic that you don't really see too often, but it's something that the next time he would be destroyed this turn, tap him instead and remove him from combat and heal all that damage on him. Anything that ends up having the damage that we ended up dealing with him or destroying or anything like that, we can tap it to regenerate it, unless it's a border life like Wrath of God, which has the creatures cannot regenerate. And it's a 2/2 right off the get-go. So this is solid commander that comes over with it. Has double damage, has +1/+1 counters, has a rewarding to be fighting. We're going to also dash in a few extra combat steps that we can be in the fight. And with that, let's shrink this on down and show you what we have. Alright, so we got 2 different ways that we can end up doing this. We can enable the tabs, which end up breaking down everything in the way that we ended up having it. Or you can disable the tabs. So what we're going to do, we're going to run it with it disabled, but we'll have a link to the description down below. And if you want to see the formal breakdown of everything, you can go over, enable the tabs, and be able to see how we end up having everything broken down into the deck. So let's disable tabs and get right on to it. We'll get through. The most exciting part is the lands. I know, it's not the most exciting part, but you gotta end up having it to be able to play a deck. So it has some nice spiciness that comes over with it. We have an Arcane Lighthouse, which attached for a card list, but that's not the reason we have it. We could pay 1, tap it. Creatures your opponents control lose Hexproof and Shroud, and cannot have Hexproof or Shroud. This is allowing us to be able to target those commanders, pay 1, sacrifice it, and then we could draw a card, only if we control 5 or more lands. 8 forests, 1 game trail, and this is one of those lands that can come and play untapped if we show them a mountain or a forest. Conclusion Forest is a land that we can use to tap for a green or a red, but it deals 1 damage to us. If we don't, it could be a colorless land. Castic Wolf Run gives us that beats with a +X/+O, and gains trample to end of turn, depending on however much we put into that X. So trample is something that we ended up also wanted to be having it, because we can have a big old creature, but if it can be blocked by a 1/1, it doesn't help us. Well, in this deck it actually kind of does help us, because then we can end up taking out a creature. But we end up wanting to take out the opponents as well. Mossfire Valley is a way that we can tap a land and tap it to gain 2 mana, which is a red and a green. We have a mountain. Rockfall Valley is another way that we can end up having a red and green. Rogue's Passage is a good old way to sneak our commander to get through. Also, it could all work with other commanders, so if we want to do some sneaky stuff, we could end up helping them out as well. But we mainly got it so our commander could go through. Rootbound Crag taps for a red or a green and comes to play untapped if we control a mountain or a forest. Shifting Woodland is an interesting little thing. It comes into play tapped unless we control a forest, and it taps for a green, which is okay. And Durium. If we have that, we can pay 2 and 2 green, and then it becomes a copy of a target permanent card in your graveyard until end of turn. Activate this if you have 4 or more other card types that's in your graveyard. So, if you notice, there's a bunch of different types that you can end up having. You have Planeswalkers, or you have Plot that costs us 1 red. That means we could exile this card, and then we could cast it as a sorcery at a later turn without having to pay the mana cost. You'll only get to play that as a sorcery. After that, we got Frantic Strength. Costs us 2 and a green. Flash. So that means we can play it at any time. And then Enchanted Creature gets +2/+2 and has Trample. Controller's Violence costs us 3 red and 2, so it costs us 5 mana altogether. And then if a creature will deal damage to a creature or a player, it deals double that damage instead. Good old way to double our damage output that we end up having. Hardened Scales is a good old +1/+1 shenanigans, because if we get to put up 1 +1/+1 counter, we get to put an additional 1 on there. So whenever we put 1, we'll end up putting 2 with hardened scales out there. Cost us 1 green. Hydra's Growth, I had to go with this one because this ended up having a whole bunch of wolves that's on there. And it costs us 2 and a green, enchanted creature. And then it gets a +1/+1 counter. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, double the +1/+1 counters on the enchanted creature. Oh man, this could end up getting bonkers. Invigorating Hot Spring is a nice card that costs us 2. Well, it costs us 1 red, 1 green, and 1 colorless. Comes in with 4 +1/+1 counters. Modified creatures you control have haste. Modified creatures are stuff that has auras on it, which would be like these enchantments, counters, or equipment. And then we can end up taking a counter off there and put it onto a creature, and then it would end up having haste. We only can do that at sorcery speed though. A little MVP that's in this deck is this Lion Umbra. Costs us 2 green and get to enchant and modify, or becomes a modified creature. It gets +3/+3 and has vigilance and reach. Vigilance means it doesn't have to attack, which is huge. That's awesome because if we're attacking with them, we can have them back as a blocker. Reach is another way we will be able to knock out those flyers. And then the third thing is Umbra Armor. Umbra Armor is, instead of the creature dying, you can sacrifice this enchantment and it will keep it alive. And it doesn't end up having to be tapped like it does with regenerations. So this is another backup plan to be able to protect our commander. Rancor, enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and trample. And when it's put into the graveyard, return it to its owner's hands. For 1 green mana, it's pretty solid. Rhythm of the Wild with the good old Wolverine art. Costs 1 red, a green, and 1. And creature spells you control cannot be countered. That's awesome against those blue decks that can counter everything, or feel like they can counter everything. And then we also have non-token creatures you control have Riot. Riot is where you can put a +1/+1 counter onto a creature, or you can give it haste. So you got a couple different avenues that you can end up going down. Rising of the Day is another way that we can end up giving haste, and then legendary creatures get +1/+0. It costs 1 red and 2. Rite of Passage is another card from the Secret Lair that costs 2 and a green, and then whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Seasons of Growth seems fantastic in this deck, where it costs 1 green and 1, and then whenever you play a creature spell, you get to scry 1. Man, we're not going to do that so much, which we'll end up covering a little bit. But whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. We have a whole bunch of fight spells, we have a whole bunch of enchantments that we end up putting on our creatures. So that's going to end up targeting it, and we're going to be drawing a card for that. Siestan Training costs 1 and a green, and then it gets, when it comes in the battlefield, we get to draw a card, and then enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and trample. Like I said, we want trample, so we went heavy into it. Snake Umbra costs 2 and a green, and it lets us slither our way to give up +1/+1, and then whenever it deals damage to a player, we end up drawing a card. More draw fuel, please. Oh, and it's also important, it says it has totem armor, where we end up sacrificing it to be able to prevent the dying of our commander or whatever creature is on there. Same thing with Spider Umbra, but it gives +1/+1 and reach. Strongback costs 2 and a green. Equip creature or equip abilities you activate that target an enchanted creature costs 3 colorless less to activate. Aura spells that you cast the target creature costs 3 less to cast. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each. That's right, each aura and equipment attached to it. So it's another way to be coming off the top. And then finally, but not least, is Unnatural Growth. Something that costs 4 red and 1. For an enchantment, at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. And it also has that adorable Groot look that's trying to look like Wolverine. Alright, let's slide right on over to the artifacts that we have. Starting off, we're going to go with a Thran Power Suit, where we end up having equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each aura and enchantment attached to it, and has Ward 2. Has equip cost of 2. Talisman of Impulse cost us 2, and then we can tap it for a colorless, or we can take 1 damage to tap it for a green or a red. Swiftfoot Boots is a good old classic. Gives haste and hexproof. Costs us 2 to play and 1 to equip. Soul Ring's good old standard ramp for any kind of deck. Costs us 1 with 2 colorless. Shadow Spear is another little sneaky card that we end up having. Costs us 1 and 2 to equip it. And then equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. That's huge. But it also has another ability that we could end up doing. We could pay 1, permit your opponent's control, lose hexproof, and indestructible until end of turn. Another way that we could end up fighting something and taking it out when they're not expecting it. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, costs us 1 and 1 green, or we could cycle it for 2, but we're not going to end up doing that. If you get to put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a target artifact or creature you control, you may put that many +1 on there instead. And then it also has it where we could pay a 1 and a green, tap it, and we get to put a +1/+1 counter on a target artifact or creature you control. Activate this only as a sorcery. So it doubles the counters just like Hardened Scales, but it also has the added ability that we could end up putting counters onto it. Embercleave is good old shenanigans. It costs us 4 and 2 red, so it's very expensive. Has Flash, costs us 1 less for each attacking creature you control. And then when it enters the battlefield, attach it to a target creature you control. So as soon as it comes into play, it gets attached to it. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, has double strike. That's right, we're going on the double strike train with trample. Normally it would cost 3 to equip it though. Brotherhood Regala costs us 2 and 3 to equip it. Unless it's a legendary creature, then it costs us 1. Equipped creature has Ward 2, so that means they have to pay 2 on top of whatever spell they're trying to play to target our creature. And then it also is an assassin into it, additional to its other types, and it can't be blocked. Then we have Bloodforged Battle Axe, which can end up doing some shenanigans. It costs us 1 colorless and 2 to equip it, and it gives a +2/+0 bonus, which is awesome. But whenever an equipped creature deals damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of Bloodforged Battle Axe. So this, whenever you hit an opponent with it, you end up making another copy. And then you can end up taking that, equipping that, then you have 2 copies, and you can end up and swing it over at an opponent again, and then you'll have 4 copies and keep on going. It's good old shenanigans. Then we have Adamantium Bonding Tank, which is really the Ozolith, but it's where the Wolverine Secret Lair costs us 1 colorless, and it's a legendary artifact, and then whenever a creature you control that leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters onto the Adamantium Bonding Tank. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if Adamantium Bonding Tank has counters on it, you may remove all the counters from it and put it on another target creature. Oh man, I was thinking this was just for +1/+1, but this also goes for those Death Strike counter, or yeah, Death Strike counters, or First Strike, or all those other counters as well. Holy smokes. Alright, so let's take a quick break and be able to figure it out. Wolverine is one of those classic X-Men, and honestly has his own comic books or solo series in the book world. And if that's something you would be interested in too, you could go over to Organic Price Books to be able to pick up that. Believe right now he has 5 different volumes that's out. Well, some of them are going to be out, but he has 5 omnibus volumes that's out there. And I believe if you go over to Grand Price Books, you could be able to pre-order Volume 6 right now as we speak. And if you go over there, use the code FIFAJack to save $2 off. Or if you have 4 or more books, use the code JACKITTOGETHER to save 5% off instead. Alright, back to the deck. So, we took a pause. We went over to the instances where we have 16 of those bad boys. We have Ancient Animist, which is another fight spell that we end up having. It costs 1 and a green. You're going to put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature if it's legendary, and then it fights a creature that opponents control. Archdruid Charm costs 3 green. I know it's pretty heavy in the green, but we get to choose one. We get to search our library for a creature card or a land card, and then put it on the battlefield tapped if it's a land. Otherwise, put it into your hand and then shuffle. So unless it's a tutor, either a land or a creature. Or we could put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to a target creature you don't control. This would also be doubled with Wolverine because he doubles all damage that it does. Or we can exile a target artifact or enchantment. Berserk is another one that came over with the Secret Lair and has this amazing art, and he's coming out of the Sentinel. Oh my goodness. Cast this spell only before combat damage step. So before combat damage ends up happening. Target creature gains trample and gets +X/+O until end of turn where it's its power. At the beginning of the next end step, destroy that creature if it attacked this turn. So Wolverine doubles this. So let's say he's a 6/6, and then he gets +6 from the Berserk that we end up playing and gains trample, so he's a 12/12. Wolverine's going to be doing 24 damage, where he's going to be able to be going over and killing someone with that commander damage. But then we have to sacrifice him at the next end step. But he also has Regenerate, so we can pay 2 to be able to regenerate him and make sure that he stays on the battlefield. Or if we happen to have an Umbra on him, we can end up dropping the Umbra instead. Cosmic Hunger costs 1 and a green. And then target creature deals damage equal to its power to another creature or planeswalker or battle, which we're not going to run into too many battles out there. I know, let's be honest, we're not going to really use it too many times for planeswalkers, but at least we get to wipe out creatures. Gaia's Gift costs 1 green and 1, and it gets a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. It gains reach, trample, hexproof, and indestructible until end of turn. This is another way that we can end up gaining that trample that we're looking for. Hexproof if they end up targeting it with a spell. Indestructibility to, well, make it indestructible to form any kind of board wipe. So it's a good all utility card that we can end up doing. Gift of the Viper costs 1 green. We get to put a +1/+1 counter, and then a reach counter on it, and a death touch counter on a target creature, and then we untap it. So it's a good way to have shenanigans to be able to untap our commander when we end up getting over and again attacked by this big old flyer. It's like, haha, you can't block it. Oh, psych, here we go. Combat shenanigans activated. Harrow costs 2 and a green. As additional cost to cast this, we have to sacrifice a land. You get to search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. So the big thing about this is that it doesn't come into play tapped. So we can end up using those lands right away. Inscription of Abundance is another flex card that we end up having because it costs us 1 colorless and 1 green. Has a kicker cost of 2 and a green. So each time we can end up kicking it, we can choose the same mode, or we can choose multiple different modes of that instead. We get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature, or we can have it where a target player gains X amount of life, where X is the greatest power among all the creatures that we control. Or we can have a target creature you control fight another creature that you don't control. So we get to end up doing that however many times that we end up kicking it. Colony Ambush costs us 2 and a green. Target creature you control fights a target creature you don't control. Good old simple thing. But we also have it as being an NFC because that means we can end up playing it as a land instead. So again, in a pinch, we can end up playing as a land. Overprotect costs us 1 green and 1, where a target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample, hexproof, and indestructible until end of turn. Psychotic Fury costs us 1 and a red. Target multicolored creature gains double strike until end of turn, and then we get to draw a card. Ram Through costs us 1 and a green. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to a target creature you don't control. If the creature you control has trample, the excessive damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. So anything that has trample, so let's say it's a 1/1 blocking our 6/6, and we have trample, 5 of that damage will go over to the opponent as well. So it's a good old spillover effect. Return of the Wild Speaker is another little flexi card that we can end up having, but we mainly have it in there because it allows us to draw cards equal to the highest power among non-human creatures that we control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. Normally you end up using it for the draw because if you noticed, Wolverine isn't a human, it's a mutant berserker hero. So we don't have to worry about that. We do have humans that's in the creatures, but we're not so worried about that. We're all here about Wolverine. That's the main reason that we're here. Tail Swipe costs us 1. Choose a target creature you control and a target creature you don't control. If you cast a spell during your main phase, the creature you control gets a +1/+1 until end of turn, and then those creatures fight one another. Teamer Battle Rage costs us 1 and a red, where a target creature gains double strike until end of turn. And then we have this little thing called Ferocious. That creature also gains trample until end of turn if you control a creature with a power of 4 or greater. Shenanigans! And then the final is Trash the Town. Costs us 1 green. So it's nice and cheap, but we end up having to pay the spree. We could pay an additional cost to this to be able to do all these different abilities. And we can pay however much we want to pay into it to be able to activate those. But we just have to pay the additional costs of them. So we can pay 2 extra, and then we get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature. Or we can pay 1 extra, and target creature gains trample until end of turn. And finally, we can pay 1, and until end of turn, target creature gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw 2 cards. And the final option that we can end up doing, we can pay all of it, where we could pay 5 mana altogether and be able to get everything. Okay, so we're going to go to the sorceries and get that knocked out, where we have 13 sorceries altogether. So we have 3 visits. Let's look for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Doesn't make them come into play tapped, so they just come into play. So you can end up using that if the card allows us to. So like if we're going over trying to fix our lands, we could grab one of those lands that had the forest subtype and be able to grab that with this. It costs us 1 green and 1 to be able to do it. Stompy Stomp has a hybrid mana where we can pay a red or a green, and then 1. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to a target creature or planeswalker you don't control. And then it also has the NFC side where we can end up flipping it, and we can end up coming in and play tapped, or we can end up tapping it for a red and a green after that. Seize the Day. Oh man, I love this art. Cost is 4. And it has a flashback cost of 2 and 1 red, so it costs us 3 for the flashback. Untap target creature. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. So that means we get more combats, and that also means that Wolverine gets bigger each time we end up doing it. Nature's Way costs us 1 green and 1. And target creature gains vigilance and trample until end of turn. It deals equal to its power to a target creature you don't control. Nature's Lore is another way we end up finding those basic forests, because it has search your library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. So it's another way that the land doesn't come into play tapped. Costs us 1 green and 1 for that. Longstalk Brawl costs us 1 green. Has gift a tapped fish. So we can end up giving them a tapped fish, which they can't use as a blocker. And it also plays for the promise cost of that. But the card's ability is that we get to choose a target creature you control and a target creature you don't control, and put a +1/+1 counter on that creature that you control if you promise the gift. So if we gave the fish, that ends up getting a +1/+1 counter to our creature that we end up choosing. And then the creatures fight. And then we can't have Wolverine without the claws. So we have a contest of claws. Costs us 1 and 1 green. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. If its excessive damage was dealt this way, discover X, where X is the excessive damage. So discover allows us to go over and get to a spell or ability that costs us X or less. So let's say we swing with a 6/6 and they block with a 2/2. We have 4 damage that's being excessive, and that's what we'll be able to discover for. Chandra Ignition is the board wipe that we have in the deck. Costs 3 and 2 red, and target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. And this is something that will end up doubling with Wolverine because, oh, this could become a big blowout. Bushwhack costs 1 green and allows us to either search for a land, reveal it, put it into our hand, then shuffle, or target creature you control fights a target creature you don't control. Another NFC with Bridge Works Battle, where target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. And when it's an NFC, it has the other side where we can end up playing it. And it enters the battlefield as the Tangle Span Bridge works. Enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters tapped. You can end up tapping it for a green. Blasphemous Act is our final board wipe we have in the deck. Costs 8 and 1 red. But let's be honest, most of the time when we're casting this, we're only paying the 1 red. Because this spell costs 1 colorless less for each creature that's on the battlefield. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. Beastie Beatdown costs 1 red and a green. Choose a target creature you control and a target creature your opponents control. The creature you control deals combat damage equal to its power to a creature your opponents control. But it also has the addition of Beryllium. And if it has Beryllium, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on the target creature that we control. Battle Guard Recovery is another way that we can pay 2 and a green and return target card from our graveyard to our hand. So if we end up using a fight spell or one of those pump spells that we ended up wanting to use, we can get it back this way. Or we always, in a pinch, play as a land. It enters the battlefield tapped, but it taps for a green later on. Let's take this moment, take a quick deep breath. Whew. We're finally coming to the end of this deck because we're down to the creatures. Alright, so there's 9 creatures that we have in this deck. And then we have Androg, the Quake Mole. Costs 2, a red and a green. And it's a Mole God, it's 8/4. And then whenever it becomes blocked, untap each other creature that you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. Or we can pay 3, a red, a green, and a green. So that's a whole lot of mana, so that's 7 mana altogether, and it must be blocked this turn. So this is another way we can end up getting more combat steps. Frost Taunter costs 5, so it costs 1 red and 4. Good Old Goblin is a 1/1, indestructible, and then whenever Frost Taunter is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to a target opponent. Pay 2 and a red, tap it, and it fights another target creature that we control. So we can end up doing a bunch of shenanigans to be able to burn out our opponents with that. Eternal Witness costs 2 green and 1 for a 2/1 human shaman that allows us to end up taking something from our graveyard and putting it back to our hand. Goblin Electro costs 1 red and 1 green for a 2/2. And then each spell you cost that's red or green costs 1 colorless less to cast. So it's important to say that this only applies once. So if we have a red and green spell, we only get 1 colorless that's going to be coming off that. Hannah and Elena Partners costs 2 and red and a green for a 2/3. And I guess this could be a lieutenant, so you could run this instead, but we're here for Wolverine. First strike, reach, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature put X amount of +1/+1 counters on another target creature that you control, where X is the power of Hannah and Alana and gains haste until end of turn. Karlach, Fury of Avernus, is a 4 and 1 red for a 5/4 Tiefling Barbarian. And then whenever you attack, if this is their first combat phase of the turn, untap all attacking creatures. They gain first strike until end of turn. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. And then you get to choose a background, but we're not going to choose it. We got this in here mainly because A, it will end up being able to give you first strike, and it gives you an extra combat phase. Laser Blades is technically a creature that's a 1/1 for 1 and a red. has double strike, and an equipped creature has double strike, and the reconfigure costs us 2. So we ended up using this as an enchant or as an equipment as well. So that's what we kind of have the idea of this being, is sneaking in and using it as an equipment. Now, if the Dire Hunt costs us 2 and 2 green for a 3/3 human warrior. Whenever one or more creatures you control fight or become blocked, draw a card. So that's going to be the good old draw fuel. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 2 and then a hybrid of a red or a green. If you do, double a target creature power until end of turn. That creature must be black this combat if able. So this also allows us to be able to have Wolverine get doubled before we end up doubling it off of Wolverine himself, but then he'll have to be blocked. But then we'll end up drawing a card for that. And the final creature is Ubern Wall Tracker. Costs us 1 green for a 1/1. We're not going to be attacking with this guy, let's be honest. Main reason we have it is for his ability of paying 1 and 1 green, and then tap him, and target creature you control fights another target creature. So we're having more fight that comes around with it. So that's the deck that we have. We have a few little sideboards. That's something that we're thinking about either getting or adding into it. And honestly, the ones I would be thinking right off the bat is Fight Rigging, because as I head away, then we get to put more +1/+1 counters. Ferocity of the Wild gives us Trample, and a +1/+0 to non-human creatures, so that sounds neat. Fast Ring or Fostering is like more draw fuel. Ornery Tumblewag allows us to do more counters. And finally, but not least, is Xenagos, God of Revels. The big reason that for this guy is not because of the creature part, because there's a decent chance that it can end up becoming a creature, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you gains haste and gets +X/+X, where X is that creature's power. So it's another way to be able to double Wolverine's thing. And honestly, I have the feeling that's going to end up making it into the deck. I just don't know where yet. And if you got any suggestions, put it down in the comments down below, and we'll always be able to read those and try it out. So that's the deck that we end up having. So let's slide back over to the main view and be able to break down what we think about the deck and give our quick synopsis about the deck. So this deck, even if you get, I've gotten mana screwed a couple times with it, but it wasn't because of the deck or anything. It's just because I didn't end up shuffling correctly and having that going over with it. But this deck, once the wheels get going, it gets going. It has a bunch of damage they can end up putting out, especially that commander damage. I mean, the ability of Wolverine doubling the damage that he does is amazing. Regeneration is a nice little sub thought. And then the +1/+1 counter additions are nice. That plays along with that little fight mechanic that we have. So this is a nice good old classic spin of a Voltron commander as well that you can end up doing, because we're going to put a bunch of enchantments onto him, and then we're going to be fighting with them, and then we're going to be able to killing opponents with them because of that entire damage. You could go either more ways of the more combat styles or combat phases, or double damage ways, or you can just dive into one different way. This is a deck that we ended up building where it covers pretty much a general scope of the commander, and we don't end up losing too much of anything. What do you think of the deck? Let us know down in the comments down below. If you're liking the content that we're putting out, like, subscribe, and hit that little bell to be notified whenever we come out with new content. And until next time, we'll see you later.